Yeah,
I'm
how you doing, man?
excited.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm a big fan of Danny. I know she started working with you with some of the issues of her last prep. She had really positive things about you to say, and then I've been seeing your stuff all over. I always like to get really into the digestion stuff because like so many
Yeah,
bodybuilders, that's a big limiting factor, and I see you talking tons about that. So that's something I really want to cover today, and just how you got into the whole integrative health thing in general. So thanks a
yeah,
lot.
for
So
sure.
today I got Austin Stout with me, prep coach, and kind of what how would you describe what you do? I mean, you wouldn't say just
Uh,
prep coach, right?
yeah, I don't know. It's everyone uses the term functional health, right? And I mean, I'm in that space, but also I do everything, right?
Yeah.
I have pro bodybuilders and postpartum moms, and so I guess I guess my demographics are pretty unlimited, I suppose.
Right. So I worked with Alan Kress. He was my first coach back in the day, and I've been a big
Okay.
fan of Scooby, forever. I know they both kind of started bodybuilding prep kind of, and then they transitioned over to more of the integrative health and the functional health side of things. Is that kind of how you started too?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate just because, you know, back in around, 2009, I think around when I started coaching, you figure from probably 2009 to 2013 to 14, there wasn't a whole lot of that going
Yeah.
on as far as there are probably some naturopaths out there, some holistic doctors, herbal medicine, things like that. But there wasn't as much of that integrated into.
Nope, nobody jacked was doing it.
Right, you're right. So there wasn't as much as that integrated into fitness per
Yeah.
se. Um, so I think that that's it kind of happened out of necessity. I had a lot of my own issues and things that I was dealing with, and that got me interested in it. And it's one of these things once you start learning a lot of this, now you can see it because you don't know it if you don't know what you're looking at, right? So it's not that these problems are new or that there's more of them. It's just that we know what we're looking for now, right? We know that we can see a lot more of it. Before it was just people just vanished and stopped competing, and you just never hear from them again if they had XYZ issue, right?
Yeah. What were your issues that got you on this path? Like your personal issues? Was it digestion?
A little bit of everything, man. I've dealt with the digestive issues. I've dealt with hormonal issues. I did the whole compete way too often in the beginning and ran my hormones into the ground. Dealing with the adrenal issues. I mean, I've a little bit of everything. So that's really what got me into exploring more of this, and then some of the more advanced testing methodologies that we use now, like the GI maps and Dutch tests and things like that. And I will say though that this whole idea of functional health is it's not limited to just so a lot of people hear that word, they think like female general population, kind of in that realm, but I do just as much, if not more, with male bodybuilders. I mean, big male bodybuilders. You got to think you're burning the candle on both ends with that demographic. I mean, there's a lot of things that are really taxing. So they're just as susceptible to those types of issues, digestive or otherwise. It's not just limited to these the demographics that people typically think of. So there's kind of this untapped, I'll say, for coaches out there, there's kind of this like
Yeah.
untapped market that's not really getting the help that they need quite yet.
Where did you like learn your stuff from? Because like you said, this wasn't super big when you first started getting into it.
Yeah, so I had a couple different main places. One was I'm fortunate enough to have a really good physician that I go to here in Ohio, Dr. Eric Serrano, who's
Oh
been in
yeah, yeah.
this. Yep,
Oh yeah, you're with
who's
us. Yeah, he's
yeah. So Eric's been
gold.
my doctor for 2012. I think we met.
Does he still post on
Um,
forums and stuff? I remember reading him posting on
I
forums
don't
and stuff.
I
I
don't
mean, I
know
don't
if
think
he
anyone posts on
does.
forums, I guess, anymore. But
Yeah, I don't know if he does anymore. He doesn't do a whole lot of social media. You'll see him pop up on YouTube here and there, like from events and stuff. Um, I I have, I'm prescribed HRT. I go in a couple times a year. I chat with them. I'm fortunate enough to um, have a little bit more access to him here and there if I
Yeah.
need him. I did get into a lot of it because of him,
Yeah.
truthfully. That was one of my main motivators there. And then of course doing a lot of my own research. And now in hindsight, when we're talking about researching these types of things 10 years ago, really what we could find or what we had access to is understanding like the mechanisms of how things work. So, for example, when you're talking about a digestive issue or hormonal issue, learning like what is the cascade that may have led us to that problem. You couldn't just go out and go into Google and type in like SIBO protocol. Now you can, right? Now, whether you're going to get 10 different
Yeah.
answers, right? You're going to get 50 different answers to the same question. Now, our problem is maybe too much information,
Yeah.
but um, you really had to learn from like bottom up approach, learning the mechanisms, kind of learning how these things worked and connecting the dots. It
A
had
lot
to
of your
start
own
somewhere,
reasoning,
right?
right? With that the early days, you
A
probably had to
lot
use a
of
lot of your own physiological reasoning to
Yep.
piece it
A lot of
together.
like process of elimination, deductive
Um,
reasoning, and the way that you're thinking, so on and so forth. So that it was a different style of learning, and now you can hire someone to teach you this stuff.
yeah. Do you have like Scooby does? Do you have like a course for coaches and stuff?
Yeah. So I started what we now call mentorship back in 2000, probably 17, around there. Someone just approached me and said, "Hey, I'll pay you to teach me this stuff." And I was like, "Okay, well, I don't have any courses, I don't have any, curriculum at the time, right?" And I kind of just built a lot of that out as I went, and added different classes and things over time. Though I tell people I'm not a I'm not like a curriculum based teacher. I do utilize educational materials. I have a lot of them, a lot of things that I've done over the years, but I'm more of a I would say what I do is a lot more dynamic. We're really trying to figure out like what's actually practical, what's the path of least resistance with these people. How do we coaching psychology? Because from a protocol perspective, you can learn and memorize those things, and you can pretty much teach anyone that stuff, right? Or they can save it on their computer and copy and paste it,
Yeah.
right? But application to all different types of people, you have 10 different people with what kind of looks like the same problem. You may have 10 different approaches or 10 different root causes, or you may have different obstacles within those people, life and family and stress and finance and um, history, genetics, so it's not, I think where we've kind of gotten off track in a lot of the education space is there's a lot of this black and white, like, dude, what's the protocol for this? I said, okay, what's the context?
Yeah.
Right. Um, so, and we all, all of us have different stressors. All of us have different things psychologically. There's trauma, there's all kinds of stuff. People don't take into account the fact that when you've when you're a super competitive person and you get slapped with this issue, what that does to you mentally compared to like a general population person. You think like, oh, I'm really tough. Yeah, you're really tough until something puts the brakes on you,
Yeah.
right? And then you don't know how to deal with it. And that's all stuff that we have to coach. We have to be able to coach through those situations, because if it was just 1 + 1 = 2, I always say I would just write an ebook
Yeah.
and you guys would never see me again.
Yeah. That's
I'd
why I
be
like.
I'd be
I,
somewhere else.
I know if it was so easy. That's why I really like what you guys do so much because it's. I feel like I kind of have one end of this, but like basically bodybuilders just fuck themselves up, right? They push themselves so hard, and that's kind of usually where most of the issues come from, I think. And like I kind of have a handle on the external side of things on how to like fix your joints, fix your exoskeleton. You push too hard that way, but like the internal stuff, that's not what I'm really good at. And then it's kind of the same thing you said. Like there are a lot of courses and things that kind of do what I do, but then they got to dumb it down and make it black and white when it's very individual. So I see a lot of parallels. I just need to get better at this stuff. So since we're kind of talking about the digestion, let's kind of stick on this for a second because that's such a huge thing, right? I think about I'm buddy with Carlos who's competing. Are you
Yeah,
where are
yeah.
you
He's
where are
good.
you at in Ohio?
I'm not far from the Arnold Classic. I am probably 40 minutes from
You
there.
didn't want to go? You're not going? I didn't
I'm
realize you
not
wanted to
going.
book this.
I don't even care this shit. I'm dude,
Yeah.
I I'm so inundated with this stuff like 24/7. I do have one or two clients that are in town that, talked about stopping by. Um, so I'm open to it, right? But I've been to the Arnold Classic, the pro show, 3 or 4 times. I've got to see Kai Green compete and Branch Warren win,
Yeah.
and I got to see some cool stuff. But
Yeah.
I much I get a lot more excited about my clients and what they're doing, competitively versus pro bodybuilding. Just to
Yeah.
be completely honest, at least these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a pretty stacked lineup. Did you watch any of the classic this morning?
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that Logan Franklin and Mike Summerfield were top two. I may be saying that name wrong, but
No, yeah, yeah, you got it right. And it looked like it's gonna be Mike. They were moving the number twos around for a little bit. He's just so
yeah,
dominant
I
from the
would say
back.
so.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, too, it looked like Logan was not opening his back up at all on his rear double bicep,
Oh, really? I
which
didn't get to look that
which was
close. Yeah.
like pinch scapula. I'm like, oh my God, no,
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
of
he knows how
a
to post so good too, so I'm surprised.
it's such an unfortunate mistake.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if it's, they get too dry or they get like something tight on them and they
Yeah,
struggle
they
right then because
can't.
he's a great poser normally. But like I was saying,
Yeah.
like so Carlos has all kinds of gut issues. I think he's got it under control now, but that really has limited his pro career so far. I think Regan finally got his gut issues under control. That was a big limiting factor for him to put on size. I mean, and Flex. I mean, that was one of the reasons why Flex could never go up to the Open really successfully, is he couldn't eat. So it's super common. It's a really big limiting factor. What would you identify as, again, there's tons of causes, but what are the main causes? Is it just lack of food diversity? Is it just total calories taken in? Or what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a combination. Both of those things you named are part of the problem. You got to think that you've got all this muscle. There's these adaptations that occur. Your body can utilize, more calories. Digestive system doesn't really grow and adapt the same way that you're putting on skeletal muscle, right? It's not like all of the sudden you can produce 10 times the amount of stomach acid that you produced when you were 100 and 60 pounds. Like it doesn't adapt in the same way. Now there are adaptations that occur. It will definitely adapt up to a point. um, we can definitely have like more or less bacteria, more or less diversity in the microbiome. The body will adapt, will grow or stunt growth of certain strains of bacteria based on what you're eating, like diversity, right? So there's adaptation, but we're just not really designed to we're not really designed to eat 6,000 calories. It's just you're not. So we obviously that you mentioned a couple specific examples. You mentioned like a muscle growth scenario, right? So you're thinking of it. This is a huge limiting factor in the off season. What happens that limits off season? You can't eat anymore because of digestion, or you get too fat. I would argue most pro bodybuilders don't get too fat
Yeah.
a lot of the time, right? They've been lean for a long time. They have a lot of tissue, the growth hormone. We got all kinds of shit going on. So they're probably not just simply getting too fat, right? Their limiting factor on growth is they kind of like get to the same point every time. It's hard to break through that because and anyone that's been there with food, you don't have to be 300 pounds. You could be
Yeah, that's me.
200 pounds
That's me at 210 right now.
right,
Yeah.
and you'll experience this. You get to that point, you're like, man, every time I get to, I don't know, 5,000 calories or 4,000 calories, it just puts the brakes on, right? Because there you have those limitations. So what would those be? Well, commonly, definitely lack of food diversity. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's one that I've been talking about a lot in the last several months, just because bodybuilders are some of the most guilty when it comes to that, is eat the same 5 or 6 foods for decades, right? Years, 10, 20 years. So really what's happening there is the microbiome, um, you're not feeding a diverse, different types of microbiome. So when you talk commensal bacteria, which is like our good bacteria, helps with digestion. This is our host defense system for like our immune system fighting pathogens, all these things. You need diversity in there. So you need different types of fibers, different types of FODMAPs and sugars, short chain fatty acids, like all these things. So if you're only eating chicken, beef, and rice, and maybe some like olive oil or something, you're really limited on how diverse that microbiome is going to be. So, like I do a lot of GI map tests, which is a stool test. There are limitations to the test. It can't measure every bacteria that we have. There are billions of different types, but it measures the most abundant ones that we have probably the most data on. And what you'll see in a lot of these guys is, yes, sometimes you'll see overgrowth of bad bacteria or dysbiotic bacteria and pathogens. You will see that, but you'll also see a lot of low commensal bacteria, or skews in commensal bacteria, which are those good bacteria because they're just not getting fed, right? So the term dysbiosis, it means there's a disproportionate amount of good and bad is kind of what that term means, right? So you could have lack of, maybe not enough commensal bacteria, so your motility slows down, immune system slows down. You start ending up with like inability to control inflammation quite as well, inability to absorb nutrients quite as well. Immune system starts kind of get a little bit funky, overreacting because like, man, you're cramming all this stuff in there. We're getting kind of inflamed, but our system isn't able to counter, there's no counter regulatory response, right? So we know that inflammation is a normal thing. We get inflammation when we train, but when we train, it's acute inflammation. We wouldn't want it to stay there for 3 weeks because we couldn't train again, right? Same thing with digestion, same thing with food. Yeah, if you're cramming a bunch of food in there, there's going to be a response with that, but you have a system, you have white blood cells, you have neutrophils, you have eosinophils, you have all these things, they can respond to that. But what happens when they can't keep up with the demand, right? Then as these things start to run away and run away and run away, we get this, we get this system that's very slow, doesn't absorb nutrients very well, which is why you actually will see a lot of nutrient deficiencies in male bodybuilders, and people are blows their mind. They're like, how can I eat so much? I'm eating all this food. How could I have a B vitamin deficiency when I eat 300 grams of protein a day and that I'm getting so many B vitamins from animal proteins? Yeah, because you're not absorbing anything,
Is
right?
that kind of the same thing where you just won't have like the fullness, you're eating in a surplus, but all of a sudden you don't feel like your muscles are full, the pumps go away. Is that related?
Yeah, you'll see, well, losing insulin sensitivities kind of to a point, but then you can even correlate that. There's even research, showing the effects on glucose absorption and glucose homeostasis. So, but yes, you're not absorbing the nutrients well, you're not partitioning the nutrients well. So the food's there, but it's not going to the right places per se. You're not absorbing the micronutrients very well. Um, maybe there's so that's kind of one part of it. Other things we see commonly if we're talking male bodybuilders, lack of stomach acid's a common one, just really high protein diets. So acid reflux, GERD type issues, H. pylori overgrowth. That's that's probably a little more common in male bodybuilders than in women, though we see it in women plenty. It's just that men eat a lot more food. They eat a lot more animal proteins. That's just the requirements are a lot higher. So naturally that happens. You'd so those, and I would say men generally, as a whole, if I were saying like statistically in my experience, men generally have more issues with like IBD type scenarios, Crohn's,
Yeah,
colitis,
that's kind of, yeah.
diverticulitis, like this autoimmune inflammatory kind of thing. So a lot of your guys, you'll see a lot of like these pros, and again, I don't know all of them, but I've worked with, a handful. I've done a lot of consultations with a lot of these guys, and actually one of my clients right now, he's, an open pro and he had Crohn's, and that's something that, we've had to work on. But long story short, they tend to experience that a little bit more rather than just like purely the bacterial overgrowth side of things. So a lot of inflammatory issues, and you kind of start, you can see it in the physique. I mean, you can see it in the skin, you know, you can see it in it that inflammation becomes so systemic, right? The joints start hurting, they're really sluggish. I mean, they cognitive function is not good. The skin starts to take on like a lot of people are like, ah, it's hormonal acne. I'm like, well, not necessarily. It's there's also this immune response, this like histamine response that's going on in the skin, and it takes on this kind of like dirty look. You know what I mean? It has like a dirty, inflamed, worn out kind of
Yeah.
look to it as well. And then you add all that oxidative stress from like high amounts of gear
Yeah.
in there, and you're just an inflammation factory,
Yeah,
essentially.
you're right. I think a lot of people will just attribute it to the inflammation from the gear or from the training, not necessarily from the diet. So, what are some of the foods that you usually recommend to bodybuilders to improve their good bacteria ratios?
Yeah, so there's you can get pretty specific with it in terms of like looking at specific foods, but I think if we're looking at if you want a general rule of thumb, fruits are clutch here just because fruits contain polyphenols. They have a lot of research showing that they feed commensal bacteria. So you think like colors like blueberries, the blues and the reds, and you know, with your berries and things. So polyphenols, antioxidants, right? Also, they contain FODMAPs. You know, a lot of people know what FODMAPs are. They've probably done a low FODMAP diet,
Yeah, yeah,
right? But you don't want to do low FODMAP diets for long periods of time either, because that, you know, that then you would start to lack diversity. So having those fibers, like soluble fiber, it's not completely undigested. It'll actually, you know, that ferments in the digestive tract. We end up with short chain fatty acids. We end up with butyrate. These things feed that commensal bacteria. So a variety of fruit in the diet. Now, when you're in the off season, food volume is key. You don't have a lot of room in that stomach. So the first things that people start eliminating are fruits and vegetables because they're like,
yeah,
I need rice,
yeah.
right? Fair point. So it doesn't have to be, you don't necessarily have to like limit your mindset on selection. I think that a lot of people tend to stick to the very typical things like blueberries, maybe, you know, maybe some other berries. Get outside the box a little bit. Think about like what fruits are a little bit higher calorie density. So if I have like a banana per weight might be a little bit higher carbohydrate, some melons, some grapes, you know, some kiwis. So when we're talking about like volume, we're getting a little higher carbohydrate for that volume, right? So it's not just taking up a bunch of space. We're contributing into our calories and our macronutrients that way, right? So you don't have to be so limited on that, but if you can get three or four different types throughout the day, you're probably doing better than 90% of people. Just start there, you know? Uh, and then think about different colors and different varieties. I think an easy way to do it, and I rotate things differently with different people, but if you were to go to go to the grocery store once a week, add a different one each week. You know, have like a rotation of like 8 of them, and
Yeah.
you know, adding just go through your rotation week to week. Just grab some new things. It's like I don't know exactly where in bodybuilding we became so limited because I remember as a kid, if you'd go into the grocery store with your mom or your dad or your grandparents or I don't know, anyone, you just kind of thought like these things are inherently healthy, right?
Yeah.
Like, so why do we eat only one or two of them, right? Why not explore some of these other fruits and other vegetables for whatever reason in bodybuilding? I mean, how many years did it take us to even eat fruit as bodybuilders?
Right. I know.
Fruit was demonized, dude. You remember?
I think what was it? I used to do it to get my liver glycogen, and then I would do the regular carbs afterwards. I think that was like the way they used to. The only time you could have
Yeah.
it was like right after just to fill that, and then the rest would go to your muscles.
Yeah. Fruit wasn't even, people wouldn't even eat fruit because they're like, ah, oh, fructose, it's only stored as liver
Yeah.
glycogen, you know, it's like
Yeah.
it's sugar, blah, blah, blah. So just the fact that we're even eating it now is, you know, it's great. So having a variety there, vegetables get a little trickier when you're talking higher calories just because they're a little more dense. You get like cruciferous veg, broccoli, cauliflower. That stuff's tough to break down
Yeah.
when you're already pounding a lot of food. So you might have to err towards things like maybe like some bell peppers, some green beans, zucchini, cucumbers, a lot more water, and those a little bit easier, softer, right? Cook things thoroughly. Um, you know, but again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way as long as it's not directly causing you
Yeah.
a digestive issue. The other thing too is the amounts don't have to be huge. I do a lot of these like reintroducing foods back into people's diets when they've been limited because we have low commensal bacteria and they're like, "Hey Austin, I can't eat a whole banana. I bloat,
Yeah.
I just
I,
genuinely react to that." But if you think about it and it's like, okay, maybe we can't eat that food, but also think about the amounts. Would that much of a banana
yeah.
cause a reaction? So it's like when we're reintroducing these foods a lot of the time, I will kind of just titrate things up over time. Week one, we only have like 25 grams of one, one thing. This dude hadn't eaten a fruit in 8 years. I'm just an example, right? So we only have, 25 grams, maybe once or twice a day. How are you doing? Feeling all right? Digest that good? He's like, yeah, that's okay. Titrate that amount up, and we start to slowly repopulate and diversify that bacteria. And then by week 5, week 6, like, man, I'm not having these food intolerances anymore,
That's a
right?
really good
I
point. I don't think anyone thinks about it that way. Like they see a little reaction, like, okay, that's a food I can't have in my
Yeah,
diet.
yeah, and it's not to say that people aren't lactose intolerant, or I mean, these are real things, but when I get people that come in that have they rattle off, 8 to 10 food intolerances, I'm like, no, 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 that's it. You have a digestive issue, right? Because I mean, yes, if you go out and eat a large pizza, your stomach might be upset, even if you have good digestion, you know. But a lot of the time when there are these really drastic food intolerances to all kinds of different stuff, like, dude, I can't eat chicken.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's nothing to do with chicken. You have low stomach acid. You can't break down animal proteins well. I can't eat beef, I can't eat bananas. I don't know, like insert whatever. There's usually an underlying issue rather than the food itself, you know?
Yeah.
So you just have to go slow, man. You just have to, we kind of start slow, assess a little more, assess a little more. Once we get to the point where we have 3, 4 different things in there and we're able to rotate pretty freely without many issues, even testing aside, even if I'm not like retesting people, pretty much assume we're rock solid. Transit time between meals speeds up a little bit. They're like, I'm only hungry for 2 hours instead of five.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry, I'm only full for 2 hours instead
Yeah.
of five. That type
Yeah.
of thing. They're able to get to the next meal. And hell, for that matter, you might even require less food.
Yeah. I was about to ask you
Sometimes,
that. Do you lower the food on some guys?
yeah, a lot of the time, it's funny because a lot of the time we'll go through that and then we'll get to like the following growth phase and they're growing on 1,000 calories less, 500 calories
Yeah, they're just
less, and they're like,
absorbing
man,
it. Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, this feels so much better.
Yeah.
This feels so much better. It's because, like you said, they're absorbing the food. The last go around they really weren't. And luckily for men, a little bit more than women, a lot of the time I'm able to clean some of these things up and reintroduce foods and lower inflammation while maybe because they come to me at like the end of a growth phase and they're tapped out. I can bring their calories down and do it while they're in a deficit, which is really nice because we're taking all that burden off the digestive
Yeah.
system kind of in conjunction with whatever other supports I'm doing, right? Women, it's a little harder to do that because women generally, I can do that in females some, but women just, even at their highest point of calories, especially
Yeah.
in general population, I mean, if you're getting up to 2,200 calories as a Gen Pop female,
No way.
you're probably doing amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I train a lot of women, and that was one of the things I want to talk about later too. Is yeah, like they just chronically undereat. They'll be at 1,400, 1,300 for years, and like, why am I not losing any weight? And it's like,
Yeah, and then you know, and then now you're in a little bit different battle because you have to. you have to facilitate metabolic function, hormonal function, which they need food, but they can't digest food. So those situations are a little bit harder. They're a little bit harder to deal with. But women, I tend to notice, again, this is not an absolute thing, but statistically, I do tend to notice they deal a little bit more with the side of like bacterial overgrowth issues. So like SIBO, small intestine bacterial
Yeah.
overgrowth, yeast and candida, things like that. I get a lot of males that have candida, though, truthfully. Um, so they will have inflammatory issues still. I mean, women have autoimmune issues just as much
Yeah.
as men, but I would, and I don't know the stats on this worldwide. It's because we're not really dealing with like the Western, like a typical Western diet. So maybe if we looked at the stats, women have just as much Crohn's and colitis and things as men. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to probably research that. But in what we're dealing with, we're generally not getting people that have digestive issues because they're eating McDonald's 3 times a day,
Yeah.
right? Like it's probably not the root of their problem, right? It's probably lack of food diversity, high stress, oxidative damage, you know, beating themselves into the ground. We're all a little nuts on top of that. So a lot of sympathetic drive all the time.
Yeah.
You're just adding fuel to that fire.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we both get a lot of those type A personalities, which we can get into a little bit too. There's a lot of mental aspects of that too. But with the good gut bacteria, are you a fan of like any of the green supplements or anything? Bodybuilders always look for some way to not do the thing that they really should be doing. Like I've never really been too into greens. Like I've tried to do the real thing, but what are your thoughts on the greens? Is that a decent substitute if you're just not getting the vegetables in?
It doesn't hurt. I think that the way you can think about it is most of those supplements are dehydrated, so they're powdered and dehydrated. So per weight, you're getting, if it's like a 10 gram scoop, you're going to get a lot more because there's not the weight of the water, per that 10 grams. But how much is that really? If it's not going to equate to, and I don't know the exact translation over, but I really doubt it's going to equate to 100 grams of vegetables in a 10-gram scoop of greens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, probably not. So it's not that it's bad, but I would probably err more towards, if we're looking to still facilitate higher calorie diets or calorie requirements, I'd maybe go towards something like smoothies, even where you can pack a lot of calories in there. Don't go too crazy with the liquid, right? But you know, you can add fats to that super easy with things like nut butters or oils
Yeah.
poured right in there, whey isolate, if you need plant protein powders, whatever, you can get you can get a glass of a smoothie with 1,500 calories in it, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be a little thick, perhaps, but
Chewing it.
it's not a bad trade-off from a volume standpoint, right? And you can really pack nutrients in, and you're probably more likely to like eat stuff you wouldn't otherwise eat with
Yeah.
things like that. Maybe you don't like spinach. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of that shit's gross, but
Yeah.
I could blend some into a smoothie. Probably be fine, you know?
Little pineapple, you
So
can take anything down.
yeah, so there's kind of workarounds, when you're talking stuff like that. And I mentioned earlier too, I mentioned polyphenols, which is one I've explored a lot more in the last couple years. And there's been a lot of cool research on showing that polyphenols feed a lot of these good commensal bacteria, like Akkermansia, which is one that's got a lot of publicity, I guess, in that space as far as gut lining and mucosal lining and metabolic health. So when you think polyphenols, you think like a type of antioxidant. So again, like the colors on the fruits, but also even polyphenols like green tea,
Yeah,
super high in
that's what I was
polyphenols,
thinking. I was wondering, yeah.
super high in polyphenols, right? How expensive is an EGCG supplement? I don't know, like $8.
Yeah.
So things like that you can utilize. And we also now have things like there's a trademark ingredient called core biome that's tributyrin. It's a butyrate source. So like butyrate's a great feeder. Now we have supplements and prebiotic supplements and things that'll feed bacteria without eating anything,
Yeah.
right? So we can kind of facilitate that process with those. And sometimes if I have somebody that's been really, really lacking in diversity, or they're really struggling with food, man, like they can't, like I know I need to get some variety in there, but they just can't seem to introduce anything, or they've been on lower calories. I might have to, like these women especially, I might have to jumpstart that process with some supplementation, right? So I can get some of these supplements in there, like these butyrate sources, like these polyphenol sources, and some of those things to start feeding that completely in the absence of food, right? So at least that way we can do that 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, whatever, kind of on the front end while we're maybe working on the inflammation and that. And then they're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling a little better. Things are moving through. My transit time feels a little better. I'm a little less bloated after meals, so on and so forth. Now let's start adding, you know, now let's start populating the food back in, right? So supplements are helpful. They can definitely help that process along quite a bit. It's a huge market now. There's a lot of cool stuff out there that we can kind of get our hands on. It used to just be everyone took probiotics. They're like, well, I have a
Yeah.
digestive issue, I just take probiotic. When probiotics we know are not now, especially they I mean, the effects of probiotics are pretty limited in most cases just because they you might get what, two, three, five, 10 strands of bacteria if you're lucky. Hopefully, it's something that's shelf stable, that's not already dead bacteria when you buy it. And it's not really, it's just inserting those strands specifically. It's not like a prebiotic, which would feed a diverse, array of bacteria, right? So probiotics are not useless, but they definitely aren't going to replace prebiotics, which will feed everything a little more equally, if that makes sense.
You a fan? You use like sauerkraut and stuff. What's your main prebiotic source that you like?
So if we're looking at probiotic type foods, I like so yeah, sauerkraut's fine. I like uh if you can handle dairy, like fermented dairy and stuff, it's fine. You can do
Well, sauerkraut's a
like
prebiotic, right? Or is it?
more probiotic.
Oh,
So it'll
is it?
have,
Okay.
yeah, so it'll have bacteria in it.
What's
But
a prebiotic?
also,
Like raw garlic? Is that a
yeah,
prebiotic?
well, yeah, because they're FODMAPs, right? So they would,
Okay.
garlic, but also basically everything that has fiber in it has
Yeah.
prebiotic properties. You know, even potatoes would, right? Oats would, right? They have like beta glucans and things. So I mean, they all do. So it's not just fruits and vegetables. Starchy carbs do too. Rice probably is about the lowest on that
Yeah.
totem pole. Rice is great for what rice is. It's
Yeah.
a basically hypoallergenic carb
Yeah.
source that nearly everyone can tolerate, and you can flavor it however you want. So rice is rice, man. It serves its purpose, you know. But if we're talking probiotic type foods, I will use those things some. A lot of people do well with goat dairy,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot more so than cow dairy. Like goat kefir, if you like that really
Yeah.
dairy, that like kind of bittery, weird dairy taste, like goat kefir, goat yogurt, goat cheese. Um, your yogurts are hit or miss, Greek yogurt and stuff like that. They have some probiotics. A lot of people just don't tolerate the dairy very well if they've already have digestive
Yeah.
issues. Um, but yeah, food probiotic sources can definitely be helpful. But again, you think the difference pre and pro. Pro is bacteria. Pro is live bacteria. Pre is something that feeds bacteria. So you really, if maybe both in combination, you put bacteria in and you put something to feed it, right? Like if you had a pet at home, you know, you got to feed it food, or it's not going to stay alive, right? So it's like you put your little pet in the stomach, you give it some food, you keep facilitating its growth, it'll get bigger, right?
Yeah. Is there like much of a difference between somebody who, like you were saying, has the slow digestion, and versus somebody who's got like a quick gastric emptying? Or do they have similar issues, just different, like caught like different things that they present, or do they have like totally different underlying issues usually?
So slower motility, assuming that let's assume that they're not just lacking, fiber in the
Yeah,
diet, maybe.
yeah,
I mean, fiber would actually slow motility to a point, right? If you're
yeah,
eating enough of it. But slower motility can also be it can be related to lacking that commensal bacteria to break down the food, right? But motility is also largely nervous system related. You're thinking the process of peristalsis, like the muscles churning and moving things, that's very much nervous system related. You hear like brain gut connection, vagus nerve, rest and digest, parasympathetic nervous system. So that's why you hear a lot of people say, try to be calmer when you eat your food, try to chew your food well, try to take deep breaths before you eat, all that stuff.
yeah,
That's uh, if you're just in if you're just a super anxious person that's constantly in fight or flight, constantly sympathetically driven, you're probably gonna have slow motility. You ever had a really hard training session, you're not hungry, you
yeah.
know. Now maybe in prep you are, maybe like in low calories you're hungry because you're just always hungry. But let's say outside of that select scenario, when you're eating a decent amount of food, it you have like a hard leg session, you're like, oh God, the sound of food for the next
Yeah.
hour, even you're like, I don't want anything to do with it. Because your body's not ready to accept food from a nervous system standpoint. And faster gastric emptying, or what we'll see a lot is these kind of like reactive loose stools where someone eats a meal and they feel like they got to rush to
Yeah.
the bathroom.
That's what Carlos was dealing with a lot, like food particles and stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of the time that's you see that more in IBD cases and those inflammatory bowel cases where again, Crohn's colitis, diverticulitis. I just say IBD because they're all kind of just
Yeah.
it's inflammation in the lower GI tract somewhere, right? You see a lot of that where it's not the meal. A lot of people think it's like the food's going right through me. I said, no, it's not. You didn't just eat your meal and that meal itself did not pass through you in 2 minutes, right? It's something, it's food that's already been in your digestive tract of, hours ago or whatever, yesterday, maybe even, I don't know. So, but what you're feeling there is, you're getting kind of like this spasms and this disruption in that process. And you're like, oh, I gotta go, I gotta go to the bathroom. And then it's normally loose stools. So you see that a lot more in those IBD type cases, especially colitis, where it's really colon concentrated. You see like, I'm gonna just like shit myself, So yeah, a lot of guys experience that a lot more. I've had issues, so that was kind of where my issues were, is more in that IBD type
Yeah.
scenario where it would, you'd eat and it would just be like, dude, I gotta go like right now, and it would just be loose stools all the time. And unfortunately, with that, a lot of people are still pretty constipated, because a lot of it's just a little bit of waste and a lot of fluid. The waste and the motility
Yeah,
the motility
mucus.
speed is
Yeah.
off, so you're not the water and the waste really aren't forming well, right? So you're getting a lot of like loose stools and some particles and undigested food, but there's still a lot of bulk that's not moving through with the water, you know?
Should those people take fiber, or would that be
Yeah, and
worse for
those
them?
people can, and that can benefit a lot of those. You want to kind of introduce that slowly, like soluble fiber. We use a lot of PHGG, which is partially hydrolyzed guar gum. So their Sun Fiber is, I think, the trademark or the name brand.
Hmm.
It's like PHGG and Acacia fiber. They're soluble fibers. The only reason we use those is they tend to be a lot better tolerated than psyllium husk, for
Yeah.
example. Metamucil and stuff like that. Those are soluble. They can work. They just tend to be a little less tolerated than like the PHGG and the Acacia. So it's something that people like if they do have those reactive loose stools, or they're lacking food diversity, because that soluble fiber also feeds the good bacteria, right? But you could slowly introduce that stuff. If I'm doing it, I'll normally start around, maybe 5 to 8 grams of fiber. And I like to do it at night because you figure you've eaten all day, everything's kind of moving through you in the nighttime. A lot of people have their first bowel, have a bowel movement like earlier in the day, right?
Yeah.
So you can kind of start at night, see if that firms you up a little bit in the morning, maybe add another serving earlier in the day. Um, and again, that could be part of that regimen with some of like that core biome in the prebiotics as those feeders, right? Before
So
we
it's kind of
start
the
putting
same thing. You're still trying to just populate the gut biome.
100%.
Just
Yeah,
have to manage
100%.
different
But
issues.
but obviously, like the fiber does multiple things. It's
Yeah.
literally bulking up the stool and feeding the good bacteria. So it has multiple purposes because yeah, if, fiber, when you're limiting food selection and you're eating a lot of food, fiber tends to get pretty low.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't track fiber, and I don't necessarily think you have to track it if you're not having problems, but you'd be surprised. I mean, or maybe you wouldn't, but I mean, I've seen a lot of guys come in that are eating 5, 6 thousand plus calories. I'm like, dude, you're getting like 12 grams of fiber.
Nothing. Yeah. That's not uncommon with us bodybuilders at all.
I'm like 12 gram. I was like, bro, 12 grams of fiber and isn't gonna cut it here.
And so we've talked about a couple of supplements. Are there any other like over-the-counter things that you really like? What's big? Like people will do like what the turmeric and the apple cider vinegar with lemon. Are you big on any of that stuff?
So I do like to use more what I would call, so we kind of mentioned some things, right? We mentioned like supplements for feeding bacteria, but also we mentioned inflammation and immune system. So I do like to lean on a lot of those anti-inflammatory type supplements at the beginning, and they can be really good even for maintenance for bodybuilders in like growth phases. So you're kind of preventing some of that from happening. Like a good bioavailable curcumin, higher dose. You can do like a curcumin phytosome version or a Mariva or the old school way they used to add like the biopurine, like the black pepper extract
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
stuff for absorption. There's, you know, it there's multiple ways to get it, but yeah, like a good curcumin. Um, Believe it or not, some of the supplements that are toted for joint health are really good gut anti-inflammatory stuff, like boswellia and PEA is another one that's really good. Antioxidants, just getting antioxidants in the diet to help
Yeah.
offset some of that free radical damage. Food
So
would
just
do
like
that.
okay, just food, but what
You
about
know,
you do any multis? You just take a general multi or anything?
food would be a great way to do it. Like the green tea, like I said, if you like some tea, drink some green tea, EGCG supplements, polyphenol supplements. All those things are relatively inexpensive and easy to do. Along
Glutamine?
with so glutamine, yes and no. Now, glutamine is really good. It's really good at helping kind of fix the mucosal lining in the gut. Now, I have one beef with glutamine. The only problem I've really had with glutamine is glutamine raises something called secretory IgA. So secretory IgA is found in the mucosal lining. It's one of the main immune components in the gut. So it helps like when you have pathogens and different bad stuff come in. It's part of the system that will neutralize that stuff, right? Then now, in a lot of these people that have really high inflammatory issues, autoimmune issues, they have really, instead of low secretory IgA, which a lot of people have, they may have really high, right? Because their immune system is cranking. So sometimes those individuals actually feel like crap on glutamine because it's jacking
Interesting.
that up. So they'll have like nausea. You try to take some glutamine in the morning and they'll actually have like nausea and some uneasy, upset stomach from it. So I kind of noticed that over the years. I'm like, man, why are these people reacting poorly to it? Just an amino acid, and kind of correlated that, jacking that, immune response up even higher. So for those individuals, they may do better with something like colostrum, which, you know, I know that used to be years ago that was hot. Like people would take colostrum, but we're using it for a little different purpose. We're using it more for the immunoglobulin content in there. The easiest way to think about it would be you're basically just adding more soldiers, right? More of
Yeah.
those immunoglobulins to help kind of let the immune system know, like, hey, dude, you can calm down a little bit. We've got help, right? We've got some backup. So colostrum can be really good for those
Is
individuals.
all cholesterol like the same?
No, you definitely not. So the only downside to colostrum is it's expensive, man.
Yeah,
To
it
get
is.
Yeah, to get good colostrum, you really want something that's
You have a brand that you like?
yeah. So I like Symbiotics is a good brand. Sovereign Labs is a good brand. There's also you can get the immunoglobulins in pill form. So there's a Microbiome Labs has it. Silver Fern is a brand that has it. The company I actually formulate with, we're working on a product, so
Oh, nice.
plugging that in there. So there will be there's a lot of options, but what you really, if you're doing a powdered colostrum, really what you want to look for is probably somewhere in the range of like 20 to 30% immunoglobulins. You got to be careful with the really cheap ones. They may only have like 5 or 10%, right?
Just love to
So
say it.
yeah, it's still colostrum. It's just it's like, when you buy an herb, if you
Yeah.
would buy like a whole herb versus something that's standardized for a
Yeah.
specific extract, it's kind of the similar concept.
Yeah.
Ashwagandha or something. If you buy whole ashwagandha, you might not be really getting, it might only have like 0.2% of the
Yeah.
extract that you want, right? So similar concept.
What about like ox bile or anything else like that?
Yeah, so if you're getting into the side of stomach acid, bile, things like that. If you are someone that has some poor fat digestion, which like a lot sometimes on the GI maps that we draw, there's something called steatocrit on there, and that shows, do you have like fat in your stool? Those individuals can benefit from ox bile, or TUDCA is probably your
Yeah.
best bet. I mean, TUDCA is just straight, it's just bile salt with, I believe, a taurine molecule, I think, attached to it. Because the original ingredient was UDCA, UDCA, and then I think there was something legality wise or FDA. Someone could probably correct me on this, but they had to like change the structure of it a little bit, which is where TUDCA came from. And Tuca's awesome though, man. Like it's an again expensive ingredient though. So with Tuca, it's with it being bile salt, it'll help with fat digestion, but you'll also notice a lot of these people that if their liver is really sluggish or high fat diets or poor cholesterol profiles, you'll start noticing like their cholesterol levels dropping,
Yeah.
triglyceride levels
My
dropping.
my cholesterol looked fantastic. Now that you mentioned it, like the only thing different I did was Tutka. So maybe
It's
that was a big thing.
Yeah, Tuca's awesome, dude. I mean, even in the research, I remember way back when we started using it, they were even seeing in higher doses in the realm of like 12, like 1,000 milligrams a day and up, probably like 1,000 to 1,750 or getting into higher dosages. They were seeing improved insulin sensitivity, like hepatic
Hmm.
insulin sensitivity, better blood glucose levels. Because you got to think like glycogen stores in the liver.
Yeah.
You're seeing that. Yeah, so you'll see people's cholesterol levels go down. You'll see their blood glucose go down. Obviously digest fats better. The liver and gut are so closely correlated because they're kind of your main detox hubs in the body, right? Um, Oxbio works. It's a cheaper alternative. You can still get pretty good results from Oxbio. I don't really think it holds candle to Tuca quite.
Yeah.
It's not
Okay.
quite on that level, but it is a cheaper alternative. If you're having more issues with stomach acid, some people may benefit from doing like a betaine HCl, hydrochloric acid supplements. I'll be honest though, a lot of guys just need to eat a little bit less protein. Like if you're one of those people that's pounding down 400 grams of protein, like you're just not using it. If you're having acid reflux all the time and you're pounding down super high protein, and I drop their protein down, half the time they're like 90% of the way there. They're like,
Yeah.
man, I'm digesting food a lot better. I feel a lot better. They grow better, you
What's like
know.
a good amount of protein per meal you like for someone who's not like a 300-pound bodybuilder,
So I
but
get it's funny because I get shit about this sometimes, like because I'm not low protein necessarily, but I do generally think that from the thing with protein is our research basically shows that we don't need quite as much as we originally thought for muscle protein synthesis, but I'm looking at it more on the digestive side of things because my thought process is if you're eating 2 grams per pound of protein, while the research may show, hey, that is, eliciting maximal, muscle protein synthesis, or probably less than that would too. If you're not absorbing it, it's kind of a moot point. If it's just
Right.
causing digestive issues, it's kind of a moot point, right? So if you are someone that's having a digestive issues, acid reflux, especially more upper GI in the stomach, a lot of pressure, a lot of like chronic. If it could be reflux, but it could also be like chronic burping, things like that. A lot of air that feel like
Yeah.
shit stuck in your throat all the time. A lot of pressure. You probably would benefit from maybe coming down to something like 1 gram per pound, or hell, I mean, maybe even less for some people. You just kind of got to see, you got to kind of start knocking it down and see where your digestion starts to feel better. It's always funny to me too, and like these general population women, a lot of people that coach are bodybuilders, or they were bodybuilders, so they'll work with Gen Pop females, and you'll get one that weighs 160 pounds. And so they just give her as much protein as they ate at 160 pounds. I'm like, dude, they've got half the muscle of you. They train half as hard as you. They're not breaking down tissue like you. And they're like, why the hell can I not digest this food?
Yeah.
It's like, they don't need that. They just don't need that much. I always talk about, one of the examples I use for a lot of the coaches I work with are if you took a bikini competitor that weighed, that was like 5'5", what would she weigh on stage? 100 pounds, 105, 110 maybe, I guess. How much lean body mass does that person actually have? Like probably under 100 pounds of lean body mass, like 90 maybe,
Yeah.
maybe less
Not
even,
even,
probably
yeah.
85.
Yeah.
So why, like, how much, and bikini competitors aren't overly muscular, but I would guarantee that they're more muscular. They have more muscle than what's underneath
Got the
that
little delts.
160. Yeah, you take that 140 pound,
Right.
150 pound, mom that you're coaching. If you peeled all that back all the way down to nothing, she's got 70 pounds of lean body mass,
Yeah.
right? She doesn't need 150 grams of protein,
Yeah.
right? So if she's having digestive issues, I mean, if we want to say like a hack, I mean, right there, you can take so much burden off, like lower her acid requirements way down just by pulling that back. And then you're like, man, motility's moving a little bit better. I'm less pressure, less bloating. And that's one thing, right? Easy.
And Patrick Tor is real big on not excessive protein and a lot higher carbs, and his guys have like crazy looks to them. I think that allows you potentially to store more and to have the benefits of, on your
Yeah,
metabolism,
it's
having those more carbs in your system.
yeah. And protein's not a really good energy source, really,
If you're using that
you
for
know.
energy, you're not functioning that good.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
so what about just a couple more about the supplements? So what about like enzymes? When guys are like bulking, a lot of times they'll take digestive enzymes. Is that effective?
Yeah, so the enzymes that we're thinking of are pancreatic enzymes. Okay. So what we have, what we're seeing is like pancreatic enzymes. Like for example, I mean, there's a whole bunch of brands that carry them, uh, but these would be enzymes to break down protein, carbs, and fat. So a lot of them will end with you see that the ACE enzymes,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
amylase, like yeah, all those. So yes and no. I I would say that it's not something that I use it's not something that I use all the time. Definitely on the again, so if I am running like a GI map, for example, which again I don't test with everyone, but you'll see elastase, which is a measure of enzyme status. I would say less than 50% of people have low elastase that have digestive issues. So it's probably not one of the most common problems that we're seeing. Like pancreatic enzymes, probably not one of the more common problems we're seeing. Some people benefit from them. If I will sometimes in higher food, if I'm kind of like going through process elimination, like, all right, well, what am I missing here? I might add they're cheap, right? And they're not going to hurt you probably. So I may add a pancreatic enzyme, something like a, now food super enzyme, something just basic, add a cap each meal, see what kind of effect we get. Again, probably not going to hurt anything. It's not something that's going to cause any, ill reactions necessarily. Some of the stuff we use for digestion, you don't want to arbitrarily start throwing
Yeah.
that at people, but that wouldn't be one of them that's going to, you know, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So what steps do you take, and then what does it like what has to not happen for you to want a fecal test from somebody? So you're doing a couple of things to mitigate, like what doesn't have to work, what doesn't sync up where you're like, okay, I need to see your poop, dude. Let's see what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, we're thinking about when we're kind of doing that initial intake with people, we're thinking, what's the diversity of the meals like? Is that's low hanging fruit, right? What's protein intake like? Like, what are our habits? What are our basic habits like? Can we reduce stress? I mean, stress is such a complex topic. It's such a huge topic. I mean, yes, there are probably things we can do. We can't, we're not therapists. Like some people need a lot more help in those areas than others, right? That can be a huge driver. You can throw as many supplements as you want at people. And sometimes that is a limiting, that's a limiting factor. But if I'm going through the basics of diversifying food, maybe like some of the some of the inflammatory supports and things like that, um, looking at how are they digesting proteins? Do we need stomach acid? Do they have like oily stools? Do we need some bile support? So I can check that stuff off my list. And then what I have to decide is, are we improving? And if we're improving, the question becomes, are we improving at a rate that's realistic in the sense that, yeah, if we just hang out here, the body will slowly heal itself over 6 months. But are we going to get buy-in for that long?
Yeah.
Do we need to go in and dig deeper? Because I would say that while a lot of people probably don't require intensive protocols, it might be something that you do just for the simple fact that, adding more supplements and more intensive protocols might be something you do just because you got to speed up the damn process or the client's going to check out mentally,
Yeah.
right? It's a juggling act as a coach. Like you have to decide maybe that's not necessary, but on paper, right? Maybe it's not necessary, but I got to keep. It's hard. I mean, it's hard if you just tell the client, "Hey, guess what? This might take 6 months, 8 months," and they're like, "Dude, that's so hard to wrap your head around." Maybe I do need to be a little more aggressive and try to speed up that process. So that's it's. I would say it's probably outside of just something obvious where I've done everything and their digestion's still horrendous. I'm just going to run a test on those people.
Yeah.
But sometimes people are improving. It's just maybe not at the rate. It's not quite at the rate that you want to keep them entertained, you know? And so I might say, okay, let's look at this. Let's see what else we got going on. Uh, People are also numbers driven, they're data driven. So that can be good and bad. Sometimes having data is great. It's something I can get buy-in with. I can like say, hey, look, you've got this stuff. Maybe they think I'm just full of shit. And they're like, well, I don't really believe that I have these problems. I'm like, well, you do because here it is.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's right in front of me. I see it every day, bro. I see it in you,
Yeah.
you know?
And sometimes you got to know the client, man. You got to kind
Yeah.
of understand personalities because that could go the complete opposite
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
You start throwing too much quantitative data out there and they might just latch onto that shit. And
Mhm.
now they're twice as stressed as they
Neurotic.
were
Yeah.
before. They're like, oh my God, you know, and it's always such a juggling act, even just the way that I talk to people. And if people are very hyper fixated on symptoms and stuff, you got to be careful because I don't want to start throwing a bunch of labels and numbers and stuff at people and freak them out more,
Yeah.
you know. So it can be really difficult. It's funny that we kind of got on that topic because this is a conversation that I have with so many of the coaches I work with of like, is that are the numbers going to help or are they going to hurt? And it's a really hard thing to decide sometimes. you
Yeah,
know?
I see the same thing. Like with what I do, I'll have, sometimes I'll have people check the ranges of motion, do certain tests to see where we're at, and then sometimes they get super neurotic about it, and that's all they focus on. And it's like, okay, well, it's like we're still trying to get work done, and I don't want to add more stress to your body. So let's not think about that at all. Don't worry at all. Let me do the work. Because, like you said, there's a lot of, especially with the kind of clients we get, I think we get a lot of these probably highly driven, highly neurotic people.
Yeah, so again, it's a judgment call, you know. It's
So,
but that's probably like any data tracking, right? I mean,
yeah,
now we have so much stuff that we can track, so many things we can track. Blood glucose, I got the little ring, right? I can track like 93 different sleep metrics, but is that
exactly.
good?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe,
Um,
maybe not.
yeah, yeah. Like sometimes with my people, I have them do little shifts to certain things just to get something small. Like we're trying to do something different during our workout. We're getting like they're taking the shift, then I'll see them on their own. They post a video and they're like going fucking way wonky, way overboard, getting in their head. And I'm like, oh, let's just not think about that. So if you have somebody who is improving, you're seeing improvements, but you still want to run the stool test, what's something that might show you that you were missing, or that you is it like showing you what kind of food maybe that they're having more issues with, or specific bacterias that they need?
Yeah, so the test I'm talking about that we use most commonly for US clients, especially, it's Diagnostic Solutions is the brand. It's called a GI map. It's a stool test. So it's measuring about a half a dozen different categories, give or take. So you're measuring um, infectious pathogens. So it would show you if you had like E. coli or salmonella or something. I mean, those are usually things you would pick up from like
Yeah.
contaminated
You
food
would
or
know if you had it, hopefully, right?
most of the time. It's going to pick up H. pylori, which is usually more of an upper GI bacteria that we deal with. A lot of your acid reflux, GERD
Ulcers.
cases, yep,
Mhm.
ulcers, stuff like that, right? Um, it'll show commensal bacteria and opportunistic or dysbiotic bacteria, so like good stuff, bad stuff, right? It'll show it can usually pick up yeast, candida, that kind of overgrowth. Parasites, there's a section for parasites. Keep in mind these it's a test of excretion. So if you have parasites and they're not coming out in your poop, then they're not going to show up on the test. But more often than not, it would probably pick them up. Also, the last section is like intestinal health markers. So there's kind of a variety of things. There's like the elastase for the enzyme, steatocrit for fat. There's also a couple inflammatory markers, immune markers. So like if you are that IBD type person, you can see like calprotectin, for example, inflammatory proteins. Blood in the stool. Do you have like blood that maybe you can't see it in your stool? It would pick up some blood. It would pick up those immune markers like the secretory IgA that I mentioned. So there's some cool stuff, like some cool secondary stuff that you can see on there. Again, I don't I probably run the test in less than 50% of people just because I get the new client and I see a pattern and I kind of know what systems to just start with, right? The food, the supplements, the inflammation, the immune system. So a lot of people you have like somewhat similar starting points, and then maybe I decide later that I want to run the GI map, unless it's just something where these people have already done multiple protocols with other people or something. We might jump right into it, assuming that it's not going to make them too
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
crazy.
It's not something like a saliva test either, where it's like you can just like a thing. It's like it's kind of personal. It's like
Yeah, it is. It is a. It's funny the test. So if anyone that's I'm sure a lot of people are listening, they maybe aren't familiar with it or have never done it. It's like I always say that it looks like the tray you would get mozzarella sticks in at the fair. Like one of those
never
little
gonna be able to
like
eat mozzarella sticks again.
yeah, right. You basically have to collect poop and put it in a vial and send
It's
it
not always
back.
pretty.
It's not the well, and especially if you've had diarrhea for six
Yeah,
months,
exactly.
it's like, oh, I got to collect this shit. But yeah,
Have you ever seen something crazy like some parasites you were mentioning in someone's stool?
yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, you get parasites. you get parasites sometimes. People poop worms out occasionally.
What
Um,
causes that? I mean, that's dogs. How do people get that? You go
yeah,
somewhere
people
crazy, get exposed to something in a different country, or what is that? Food?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, like hey, I went on vacation to Thailand and now my digestion's fucked up. I'm like, oh no,
That's
you
creepy.
know. Yeah, but I would say that a lot of us probably get exposed to, like the larva and the eggs and stuff from parasites. It's just that, like, if your digestion's pretty good and you have relatively regular motility and your liver's functioning and stuff, you're gonna poop that stuff out.
That's
It's not
wild to
gonna
think
hang
about.
out in there. It's just not gonna hang out in there and manifest in anything significant a lot of the time, right? And the same thing with those pathogens that you'll see on there we get exposed, we'll get exposed to that stuff. It's not that we don't. I mean, there's a lot of things we get exposed to. Mold was like a really hot topic for a while, and a lot of people still talk about it. But I've seen some research, and again, I'm sure that depending on where you look, you can probably find different answers. That's how research is,
Yeah.
obviously. But it was something like 70 to 80% of commercial buildings had mold spores that they tested in the sample size. I'm like, everyone is going to get exposed to this stuff somewhere. Granted, the amount, if this wall that I'm sitting in front of is like has mold seeping through it, that's probably going to be an issue. But just if you have a relatively healthy immune system and your liver works and your guts, functioning halfway decent, your immune system takes care of a lot of this stuff. You poop it out, you pee it out, you know. So it's not that you can't, you're not getting exposed to it. It's just a lot of people's body can handle it. But yeah, you see some crazy stuff. I've had people, bleeding out their ass every day, like really severe rectal bleeding, like IBD, some severe
Yeah.
IBD stuff. That happens for sure. You got to keep in mind though, I'm getting a lot of like the absolute dumpster fire shit
Yeah.
coming in. So the stuff that I see is probably a little bit less common for most people that are kind of just getting into the whole gut health realm, you know. They're probably not seeing that stuff quite as often. I'm usually getting the ones that have had 5 coaches already that have
Yeah.
like tried everything and they're really in a bad spot. So I'm getting the worst, getting like the worst of the worst.
Yeah. If someone's got like just a lot of the inflammation, the IBD symptoms, are there certain foods you try to take out, like without doing the stool test? Like, what do they say? Like, I mean, like gluten. Gluten's a big one, right? Like a lot of people take out gluten if they have issues like that. Is that something you recommend?
Yeah, gluten and dairy are common ones. The gluten thing's interesting because a lot of people do fine with it. It's the only things I've really been able to find about gluten is it potentially could raise zonulin levels, which zonulin is a protein. Zonulin basically helps turn on and off intestinal permeability. So like the junctures that are allowing nutrients through. So you can measure zonulin on a GI map and it would it would basically tell you, it's like leaky gut, pretty much. I know it's not a scientific term, but it would give you some indication of as to whether or not you have it. So gluten may increase that, maybe, maybe not. I don't know that gluten in and of itself, some people have like a little bit of an immune response to it. They'll get like they get a little swollen, like, like, oh man, my rings are tight, or my hands are swollen, or my face is a little puffy. So some people, and they don't have celiac disease. So there's this whole argument, like, is there non-celiac gluten intolerance? Like, is that a thing? And I would say, yeah, because there's
Yeah.
intolerance to anything.
Yeah, right.
So it's not even really an argument if it exists. I mean, because yeah, you
Yeah,
can
I'm not
have food
lactose intolerant, but
intolerance.
if ice cream, I'm gonna get fucked up. Big
Yeah, I
trouble.
mean, you can have intolerances to anything. So I think even just classifying it as non-celiac gluten intolerance is just a flawed train of thought. It's like, do you have a digestive issue? Maybe you don't handle gluten well because you have a digestive issue.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen plenty of people handle it just fine after that. I had a guy that I consulted with a few times from overseas, and he did a testimonial for me. And the funny thing, he was talking in the testimonial. One of the things he said is, "I tested it, man. I could eat anything after." I was done. He's like, I went out and ate like two large pizzas and I was okay. I was just really full for like 3 hours and then I was fine. I was like, I don't suggest that, by the way, but the whole point of that was from somebody that couldn't eat anything before. It's like, dude, everything he put in his stomach, he felt terrible, right? So it's just that these food intolerances are, you try to eliminate the most common ones, which may be gluten, probably dairy, lactose, stuff like that. But I don't, but beyond that, those are probably the major two. But beyond that, if you're dealing with inflammatory issues, don't overeat protein.
Yeah.
That causes a lot of reactions in those people. Got to be careful with fiber a lot of the time. Like that's why I said earlier, if you are having those like reactive loose stools, we might add a little bit of fiber. Just see how you feel. Might like 5-10 grams maybe, depending on how much you're eating. So you don't want to go too crazy with that.
Yeah, I've always read that if you're having like an acute bout, you kind of don't want it, but then if that once that bout's over, then it can be
They say
potentially beneficial.
low residue diet is one of
Yeah.
the terms they'll use, like a low residue diet. It's like stuff that's not going to bulk up too much and like strain you,
Yeah.
you know, pretty much. That's kind of the, with the IBD, that's like kind of a diet methodology you might want to use. So, yeah, so I mean, probably just couple, really those couple foods. I like to try to get as much variety as I can, you know. It's just like I said before, start small, test things out, little bits. You can, most people can handle, most people can handle 20 grams of blueberries,
Yeah.
you know, usually.
What about things like maybe dieting foods like ketchup? And I always heard like the dehydrated spices, like the garlic and stuff. Is that something you see people have issues with sometimes or not that much?
Yeah, not that often. I mean, if they, occasionally, if someone has a lot of bacterial overgrowth, they might be sensitive to some of the spices like garlic and onion and stuff like that, just because they ferment, you know, pretty heavily. I would, here, here's the thing about that kind of stuff. There's, when you're doing any of these more intensive protocols, some people get really crazy with it. They're like, no FODMAPs, no spices, no, don't chew two pieces of gum, you know, don't have coffee, don't have any caffeine, don't have like even a slight bit of no like amino acids during training because it has sucralose or whatever. I will say this: I have done so many of these cases. Rarely, or maybe never, are those the things
Yeah.
that is going to stop you from getting better, right? If granted, now look, if you ingest something and you like blow up from it and you feel terrible, use common sense. But
Yeah.
usually those things just aren't going to be the thing that stops you from getting, you know, stops you from getting better. And I always go as far as to say that never eating those things and eliminating everything is probably just going to create a bunch of food fear.
All right.
And then it's so difficult, and I've run into this, it's so difficult to get people to go back to any of that stuff later. It's like, oh, I'm feeling better, but I'm afraid to ever eat a FODMAP again. I'm afraid to ever drink a Diet Coke again. I'm afraid to ever, whatever, like insert any of those things. It's like, that doesn't seem very, that does not seem like a very good
Fun.
relationship with food nor sustainable,
Yeah.
right? So you've just made everyone afraid of everything. And that's not good either.
Yeah. And like I said, it's probably like at the point that you get these people too, they're probably already getting like you said,
Dude,
they're
they're
five
so
coaches
hyper
in,
vigilant.
they think I can't do
Yeah.
anything to fix myself. So they're probably
They're
really,
so hyper vigilant and hyper fixated on the symptoms. I almost try to have a little bit of that stuff in there and work on those big systems. And that way they can see like, okay, I can still get better while I'm still having a little bit of this stuff. And it almost creates like a little bit of sense of normalcy. And they tend to do a lot better with it. They may be a little bit apprehensive at first, but it's like, okay, I'm feeling some positive effects, but you got to keep in mind, like when you're healing from this stuff, you're going to have a bad day once in a while, man. You can't, if you've gone from having IBD and like crap in your pants every time you eat to only reacting once or twice a week, dude, that's huge. That's a huge win. Like that's a 90% improvement. So you can't just, as you're getting better, you can't just focus on a bad day, because I guarantee that anyone with good digestion could probably, have a super stressful day and like lack sleep or something, and they're constipated the next day or they're bloated. It's normal, right? It's an acute reaction. It's normal. So you just can't get so fixated on symptoms that every time, you burp or fart, you think you're like, oh God, we need to draw another GI map. Like, oh no.
Are there any other kind of more like niche supplements or pharmaceuticals that you like for like gut health and mitochondria functions?
There's a few big ones that probably would benefit most people. It's cost prohibitive with some cases, and it's just not necessary with a lot of people. But especially in, again, especially in the like really highly inflammatory cases, because those can be the ones that they're just a little bit harder to get. Anyone's had an autoimmune condition, they can flare up and it can just be really hard to control, right? So think of it in that regard. Um, BPC 157 oral, which is the arginate salt form, is normally the oral form that people use. Even TB 500s has some really good systemic, inflammatory reduction. I know a lot of people use it for like tissue,
Yeah.
tissue injuries, but it can still benefit digestion from the inflammatory standpoint. So, and that could be injectable, but the oral, you really want to use the oral arginate for the BPC. GHK copper peptide's an interesting one. That's that's been used a little bit more. There's liraglutide. I would really say like those are the big ones. There's a company out of Australia called Level Up. It's LVL Up, and they have one called Ultimate GI Repair that has like all the oral, you know,
Yeah.
all the oral peptides in the right forms. It has like some zinc carnosine in there for,
What about those?
intestinal lining.
What about this? Sorry. This is something that Carlos recommended me. It's the BPC 157. It's got KPV, PEA,
Yep.
tributrin. That's
Yeah.
this thing was like
Perfect.
400
Great.
$400. So like you said, it can be
Great
cost per
supplement again, but very expensive. So it
Yeah.
has the tributyrine, right? Help with the bacterial balance, help with inflammation. The KPV is a good one. Um, Again, like you're looking more like inflammatory healing
Yeah.
peptides, the oral BPC. They're expensive products, man. Like these are okay. So if I'm going to use this stuff, here's where I would normally use it. We have, again, usually like Crohn's colitis case. Like I get someone, you know, they're fucking bleeding out their ass, like that type of thing, or they're having like a really bad flare up. These are things I would maybe use on the front end with someone to get it under control. And then either A, you just eliminate it, or you run maybe a lot lower dose for maintenance. So like that product that you mentioned, maybe you're running like 2 capsules a day at the beginning for a month or so as you get everything under control, and then maybe like one for maintenance. The Level Up brand, I would do something similar. I just, from a cost perspective, you just usually can't run them permanently. And normally, once they've kind of healed up the tissues internally, you normally don't need them. It's something where I would save it for a flare up. If I have someone with really, really bad IBD that tends to be very temperamental, I might have them keep a bottle of it in there,
Yeah.
and just in case, or maybe they're going to prep for a show, and I have them run like 1 cap a day as a maintenance through the prep, just to kind of make sure that nothing you know gets too crazy when their body's stressed out. But yeah, those oral peptides can be fantastic. I mean, they're very powerful. You're just going to be spending 250, 300, four hundred
Yeah.
dollars a month.
Dude, I think my if I'm taking two of these pills a month, that is more than me taking four I use of pharmaceutical growth a month.
Yeah, they're 100%. They're expensive. The US, some of the research peptide companies have started to come out with some products now, come out with some of these, and you can get them. That company, like I said, that company in Australia, obviously in the US, that none of it's over the counter. So you got to go
Yeah.
research route and find, reputable companies and stuff. But it doesn't matter where you're getting it. It's going to be a pretty penny.
Yeah. So
So
are you gonna compete again? You did the nationals, right? You're gonna try to get your
yeah,
pro card. Or
probably next year. I think probably Masters. I'll be 35 this year, so I'll probably just
which
throw into the Masters ring.
next year, 26?
Yeah, I'll be 35 this year, but not in time for
Yeah.
Masters Nationals or North Americans or anything. So probably next year.
That's what I did this year. I did Masters North American. Sucks you got to go to Pittsburgh for those two shows. I
Oh, I
fucking hate.
live in Ohio, so that's not far.
I was just saying Pittsburgh just sucks.
Oh well, yeah,
As a
Pittsburgh's
as a city, it's definitely my least favorite city I've
it's
ever
nothing
been to in
special.
America. No, I love shitting on it. Well, man, awesome. Thank you so much. You answered like all my digestion questions. I think this is gonna be really helpful for a lot of us because, like I said, man, it sucks to like put in the work to be willing to push hard, and then your stomach and your digestion system just doesn't cooperate with you. I know it can be frustrating as a limiting factor for a lot of guys. So, thanks
Yeah,
for all your knowledge today.
yeah, it's definitely if I beyond everything we talked about, it's something that if you are struggling, seek some help from people. It's a worthwhile investment. I know that I make money on this stuff. It's a huge part of my business, but I'm just saying I know for me and the people that I've worked with, if you are a bodybuilder especially, it is something that will propel you to higher, to greater heights because you will come to a point where it gets hard to make progress after a while. And if you're getting stuck on the same spot every off season over and over and over again because you can't eat food, it doesn't matter how often you blend your damn chicken, like it's not going to work, man. You're just going to be stuck in that loop. So
How's
cool.
Danny doing? What do you have? Does she compete anytime soon? You guys still just trying to bounce her out?
I think next year will be good for her. I think based on where we're at, we're making some good headway now. She was in a rough spot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, cool. I'll be looking forward to seeing what she does and what you do for sure next year, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem, buddy. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Take it easy, brother.
Thanks.